Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Now, you may remember some time ago I had author Guy Anderson on the show talking about his book, Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, which you may have rushed out and bought. I hope you did. Fascinating book, all about the Great Reset of 1776. Well, he hasn't sat idle doing nothing, as I'm sure you would imagine. He has written a new book and it's called The Rise of the Clones, the Cabbage Patch Babies. More information about that, but also about clones. I've recently seen my clone on the internet. It's not me, of course, but it is an AI clone, advertising goodness knows what. It is a bit of a worry. I made a video about that only the other day, about how our images can be cloned. But I think Guy is talking not just about the AI clones of today, but actual people that have been cloned. So let's find out more. Guy joins me now. Hello, Guy.
Hello, Richard. Thank you for having me back on.
It's a pleasure. Now, the first question I've got to ask you, is that the real Guy Anderson or is it a clone?
But
You never know, do you?
I suppose that's the funny thing, isn't it? I think it's me.
Oh,
I'm confident that it's me, but I do wonder that, when people say they've been cloned, does the clone know it's a clone? You know.
yeah, and well, we'll find out what a clone really is. But let's just remind ourselves. You wrote this book last year. It came out, the Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, and you were telling us about the fact that, in your understanding, your belief, your research has come to the conclusion that there was a reset in 1776. That a lot of our history has been false. John Hamer would confer with that. He wrote The Falsification of History, and a lot of people are sort of talking about that sort of thing. So it's not quite a new idea, but Tartaria, this empire, which has been effectively scrubbed out of history, and yet when you look at the Greco-Roman buildings, they're all over the world, and they seem to have popped up at similar times, or we've built them, if you agree with the current narrative, all at the same time across the world with donkeys that would pull the material. It is a bit odd, isn't it?
That's a brilliant analogy. That's actually a lot of the groups that I'm in on Facebook. That's often what they say. That this was a horse and cart and a hammer and chisel. And the other thing that's interesting with those buildings is if you look at the population where these buildings are constructed, the narrative doesn't stack up. So often they're built when the population is quite small in comparison to today. And the narrative will tell you that actually what they did probably was sourced labor from further afield. But what they forget to mention is that there were buildings going up everywhere at the same
Mm.
time of a similar kind of style and design. So where was the labor coming from? And as you quite rightly said, they're all over the world. So how did someone in Samoa share the blueprints to build an almost identical building to one in Washington or London, for example? It all seemed to happen simultaneously.
And of course, the building materials that they're using, this fabulous stone and stuff, that would have to be transported somehow. And this is pre railways. So I'm not quite sure how they managed to load that onto horses and carts
Yeah, absolutely, and also get
across,
the
across terrain, which we know from history that, that just ordinary coaches and horses that travelled people back at that period were rutted. They sort of disbanded the Roman roads, and Roman roads don't go everywhere. And so it's very difficult to conceive that these buildings were built when they say they were built. And so, therefore, if they were built at some other time, there must have been other technologies to make it happen.
Yes, I agree. And I think that there is a common theme with these buildings. They all share a similar kind of architectural style. And as I said earlier on, they were all built at a very similar time. So it's buried deep. They have hidden this from us, and a lot of them have very similar sort of situations with regard to lower levels. A lot of them
Mm.
will have several layers, levels, sorry, of basements. which is strange again because if you're able to build something like that, why wouldn't you just keep going up? Why would you dig into the ground? It
Well,
does seem
especially if you haven't
strange.
got electricity to light the place, it would mean
Yeah,
candles and lack of air.
yeah, we know, don't we? Anyone who's ever had a cellar knows that we have problems with damp,
Mm.
even today. So it does defy common sense and logic to build a sort of 3 or 4 story structure and then put 2 or 3 stories below ground level. It doesn't make any sense, and that aligns with the theory that there were world events like mud floods that occurred, and there are photographic evidence of these out there, and that seems to have happened across the world, resulting in people literally digging out buildings.
Yes, and so you get these windows that are at street level, which just looks a
Yeah.
bit weird. Why would you do that? Anyway, so you talk a lot about that in your previous book, and we can refer people to our. I think we did 2 interviews about this sort of stuff, didn't we? In the
Yes,
past,
yes, we did.
one you were writing it, and then you came out. So you clearly like it and enjoy doing the research and the writing, and you've come up with your second book in the sort of series with a lovely cover, I have to say,
Thank you.
very colourful cover with babies coming out of cabbage patches,
Mm.
and you've called it the rise of the clones. So before we start anywhere, just for me, because this is not an area that I'm in any way familiar with really, is how would you define a clone?
That is a direct replica of someone else in exactly the same way as Dolly the sheep would be.
Right.
So it really, for me, it was something that I started looking at in 2012. And I can't recommend highly enough that anybody that's interested looks into someone called Donald Marshall. He's written a lot of books. Most of his content and interviews that he conducted were on BitChute, but as most people will know, we're no longer allowed in the UK to have access to that unless you've got a VPN. So that's been taken away from us. But he explains that there are different methods of cloning, but ultimately, what they do in these cloning centers, which he alleges are in dumb bases, these military bases all across the world, that the information from the person to the clone is transmitted during REM sleep. So it's uploaded. Now he does explain in great detail how that happens. What I've tried to do in my book is simplify it because it's
Well, I can imagine it's very
confusing.
complicated. Yes, I
Yeah,
can
it's
imagine.
confusing to say the very least. So yeah, but his research stems from Hollywood and the cloning of celebrities, which we're hearing about a lot more now. People,
So is
actors
that
like
a real? I mean, do you think that's a real thing that celebrities are cloned? I mean, I think some people might, be hearing this for the very first time and go, "Really? Well, that sounds a bit odd." Do you think that's a thing?
initially, I thought that it was doubles being
Right.
used. But that was until I stumbled across Donald Marshall. And for a very long time, I just thought, well, they're just getting people that look very, very similar. And of course, technology now exists in the public domain where we see, masks being created where you can look like anybody you choose. And as far as I can see, if they're available now to us, they've probably been around for a very long time. So these sort of body suits,
Hmm.
so to speak. And that's kind of what I thought until I started looking closer at video footage. And there are quite a few famous clips out there of people like Hillary Clinton, Lady Gaga, Katy Perry actually appearing to malfunction live. And
As if they were like robots.
as if something's happened, um, like a kind of a flaw or a bug in a program. Now,
Hmm.
I've got 2 theories on that. One is that it is because it's a clone, and Donald Marshall suggests that they are adolescent and they have a handler. Now, there is, and you can find this still on YouTube, there is footage of Martin Lawrence and Will Smith after they filmed the last Bad Boys movie, which I haven't seen. There was a press conference and they're walking together, and Martin Lawrence isn't talking. And the odd word that does come out of his mouth, Will Smith's taking over and answering questions for him. It's almost like he's sort of comatose or got severe jet lag. And you might think that that's a one-off, but then the same thing happened with the film Roadhouse, the new version of the film Roadhouse. The old one was Patrick Swayze, and that's with Conor McGregor, the fighter. Exactly the same thing happens. He sort of has some weird malfunction, and apparently that's a glitch. That is a flaw because they are adolescent. They're made quite quickly, and that was the selling point, the USP with the incubator babies in the World's Fairs that were launched by Dr. Martin Cooney, that they could grow a 9-month baby within just a few days. And people will be able to find that online if they look. Now, I kind of thought that that was just a catchy gimmick to promote incubators. But Donald's research suggests that actually, no, they speed up the whole process in these tanks. It goes from, you know, a baby, a fetus almost, to a fully formed human quite quickly in a matter of months rather than years. Now, obviously, I've never seen this taking place, but I'm constantly sent information on it. And the more that I dug into it, the more I found celebrities sort of stumbling, collapsing, stuttering. The best one of Hillary Clinton is her actually being asked a question when she's leaving a building by a group of people waiting to speak to her. And she starts wobbling her head and says, I recommend the chai latte, and then half collapses and is taken into the back of a car and driven away. Now, I wonder if that is a flaw or if it is if they can transfer consciousness through REM, if they can do that remotely, I suppose in a kind of almost hypnotic process. Is it possible that if you're not towing the line, they send you a quick surge and as a kind of warning shot across the bow saying that you've spoken about something we didn't want you to, you've done something we didn't want you to, we're going to humiliate you. This is just a test of a snippet of what's possible.
What's just occurred to me, which is quite whether this is related or not, but I just thought I'd say it, and I've got to be careful how I say this. It has been alleged that within the recent medical intervention that everybody took, there is technology that is operated by a wireless system that has something to do with teeth of a certain cold colour. If I can put it like that. Yeah, people are now getting what it is, but one has to jump around this because this is very sensitive on the tube of views that I'm sitting on. And one wonders, it's claimed that that is a way of controlling the consciousness, your moods, your whether you're upbeat, downbeat, whatever, and indeed your body to try and keep you ill so that you can go and get some more pharmaceuticals and keep those poor pharmaceuticals and chemists in the money that they need to keep their little hovels going. And one wonders whether this system is actually being used on these clones as a control mechanism then, from what you've just said.
Yeah, so this is nanotechnology we're talking about now, isn't
Oh,
it?
great. No, yeah, that's just given me a good ban.
Oh,
No,
crikey. Sorry, was I not supposed to say that? I didn't.
that I'm jumping around the algorithm so that I don't. But because we haven't said it in the same sentence, I think the AI has probably not picked up on it.
Yeah, sorry, Richard. I thought you were actually trying to avoid saying certain words. I didn't think that that was one of them.
Well, that was only in connection. I think if you put certain words in a certain sequence, it gets picked up. But anyway, but the audience now know what we're talking about if they didn't before, so don't worry about
Oh,
it.
damn. Do you know, it's funny. In the early 90s, I worked for a vehicle security manufacturer, and that was the same technology they were using, but actually to randomly encrypt remote controls for the very first time. So each time you pressed your car alarm remote control, it sent a different code, so it couldn't be mimicked. So it
Right.
couldn't be replicated, and that was being done through the airwaves. So yes, in a very similar way. But the research that I've read from Donald Marshall is that actually they have a handler. So they're told exactly what to do. They're infantile. The clone is infantile. They're told exactly what they're supposed to do. Now, there's a rapper in America called Chris Brown, And about 10 years ago now, it must be around 10 years ago, maybe even longer, he was involved in a situation where he had assaulted a woman. I can't remember the exact details of it, but it ended up going to court. And sat in the back of the courtroom was Rihanna. And at the time, people were saying that Rihanna was Chris Brown's handler. And the handler is the person that controls the clone because they are infantile. They've got all of the information that the real person has, and they can do everything the real person can do, but they can't think independently. So in the court appearances, Chris Brown, and sat at the back is Rihanna, and she can be seen saying things. She's sat completely on her own, but she's staring at Chris Brown the entire time and saying things. So that's the theory there. Will Smith is handling Martin Lawrence. Jake, whose surname I can't pronounce, from the new Roadhouse movie, is the handler for Conor McGregor. They appear to need somebody there to guide them and control them to an extent. But
And
how?
somebody famous, it sounds, rather than somebody anonymous that could sit in the courtroom and quietly, oh, just say this, just say that. I mean, that's a bit odd, isn't it? Because the attention is, you're suddenly drawn. Well, why is Roanna sitting there?
Well, she's was a very close friend, so she was expected to be there to support him anyway.
Oh, I see.
But
Oh,
she sat
okay.
on her own, which was what I knew it was unusual and right at the back.
Right.
But in a press conference situation where two celebrities, as people refer to them, I mean, I think you and I have got a different opinion on these people. Um, when you've got two celebrities being interviewed, like Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, when a movie has just come out and it's a press conference and they're both there, then obviously, one of them is if one of them is the handler of the other, they both need to be in the same place at the same time to conduct the press interview. But you can clearly see from this one, which went viral on YouTube, that Martin Lawrence clearly isn't the Martin Lawrence that's able to act or perform. Either that or something horrific has happened to him. So yeah, it seems to be whoever would be with them anyway in the public eye is the person that's controlling them.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, that sounds, kind of quite science fiction, but we are in a world
Yes, it
where
does. Yeah.
we're having to believe a whole load of things which was otherwise science fiction.
Mm.
So so you've defined, you've defined a clone that said that this is some sort of human accelerated in its growth and
Mm.
presumably in its mind. Is it? I mean, so it's not a robot, and is it
No,
sentient, as in you and I?
no, no, not in the same respect. No. So for all intents and purposes, it is a twin.
Hmm.
And if it wasn't fed information, and if it was grown in the natural way, and not speeded up, then it would develop slowly its own personality and its own interests and abilities, and may well go off and do something completely different. But the idea is that when you sell your soul to the devil, and Mark Devlin was discussing this on your show recently, when
Yeah.
you sell your soul to the devil, that actually what that means is because you're selling something that to most people doesn't exist. It's an inanimate object. It's something that can't be quantified. So they're giving away something they don't believe in anyway. So to them, it's a kind of a paradox, or it's nonsensical. So they sign their soul over to the devil in order to receive fame and fortune. But what actually they're doing, and this is from 2012, I was on the same page as most of the people watching this. But 13 years on, it's pretty compelling stuff. Um, you're giving the right when you sell your soul to have a duplicate made of you. Now that isn't so it can stand in for you if you're not very well and there's a press conference going on or they need you to be somewhere. The Hollywood powers want you to be at a particular event. It's actually a lot more nefarious than that. It's so the clone can be used for the pleasure of the people that cloned you. So let's call them the Illuminati. They
And,
have
and,
the
and
power. Sorry.
no, no, go. I know. What do you mean by the pleasure that the Illuminati want for you?
Yeah, well, it tends to be acts of sexual depravity. It's they're taking great pleasure in abusing physically as well as sexually abusing the clone. So imagine that you could have, I'm just going to pick someone at random, you could have Brad Pitt round tonight for your dinner party, and everybody can do whatever they want to him. Now,
Right.
it's not the real Brad Pitt. And as long as the real Brad Pitt, does what he's told, turns up where he's supposed to, keeps pumping the movies out there, doesn't speak out about certain subjects, that's absolutely fine. And each night when he goes to sleep, the information on what he did the day before, if you like, is sent during REM to the clones. So the clone's up to date. So it could be interviewed and asked exactly
Gosh.
what he did yesterday. But if Brad Pitt was to speak out about something, or perhaps imply something during an interview, or decides that they no longer want to act and they want to take a break, then they will start sending the memory from the clone to the real person, the real Brad Pitt, when he goes into REM. So he will wake up, and he'll be in a considerable amount of pain. And this allegedly happened to Whitney Houston and an American actor called Bernie Mac. Bernie Mac had an aneurysm and died, and that was after speaking out. Whitney Houston obviously died, and that was after she refused to give public appearances, even radio interviews. She decided she'd had enough, didn't want to do it anymore, and within a couple of days, she was found dead. And of course, then they'll say that there were drugs involved, and lots of other things. But Donald said that Donald Marshall said that when he stopped towing the line, he would wake up in the morning in pain, considerable pain, and he was constantly going to the doctors before he knew what had happened to him, with chest complaints, problems with his heart, and they could find absolutely nothing wrong with him, but he was in constant agony. So yeah, that's how they do it.
Wow. And so are they the only use of clones, or are clones being used for different purposes, but, not just famous people?
Well, that's something that we don't know, because it's possible that anybody could be cloned in exactly the same process that right now companies like Clonaid are offering to clone your pet. Incidentally, on their website, they offer to clone you as well, or deceased members and loved ones. That's there on their website, clonaid.com. They provide on the
So they
homepage.
can clone. So if somebody's dead, I mean, how would they get the REM information from their sleep?
They can't. So the person would ultimately grow up to be someone entirely different. They would just look the same. And I actually put that scenario into my book in the conclusion,
Right.
because as far as I can see, I gave people the situation that, let's say, you're 30 years old, you've just got married, your wife dies, the love of your life dies, you Clonaid contact you, and for £100,000 they will provide you with a replica of her. But Clonaid aren't offering to speed up the process. This will be someone that grows normally. It's kind of an equivalent, I suppose, of a test tube baby, using the DNA from the deceased. But they're not going to be the same person, because they didn't grow up in the same household. They haven't experienced the same things. And ultimately, by the time they get to 30, you're going to be 60.
Well, you'd have a little. I mean, it's like having a baby, isn't it? You're
Exactly.
ha- you're
Yeah.
having a baby that's got to grow up. That's not an instant. And as you say, by the time if they've died when you're 30, you're 60 when they're now the same age that they
Yeah.
were when they died. I mean, you've got 30 years without that. You may have met somebody else. I mean, it's a ridiculous
Yeah.
notion. I mean, who
It is.
possibly could do that?
And also, of course, you're going to be raising that child. So that child is going to see you as a parent. It could never be
Yeah.
somebody. So what have you done? What actually have you done? You've replaced someone who died. You've not really honored their death. You've replaced someone that's died, and now you have an infant that will one day look like the person that you lost,
Hmm.
when you're too old for it to be of any practical or really logical sense.
And highly unusual that
Yeah.
somebody of 60 is, well, apart from unless you're a billionaire or a millionaire,
Well,
but in
yeah.
that 30 years, when you're still, say, sexually active, you'll want to go and do whatever you want to do
Yeah.
with presumably other people, and you may well fall in love with somebody else, and then you're lumbered with this clone of somebody, and you think, actually, I've moved on from that.
And they're lumbered too, aren't they? Because and this is what I said in the book. I gave people a sort of a story, I suppose, a scenario, because that person, that child, is going to go to school. It's going to make friends. It's going to have it. It's probably going to want its first boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. And what do? Do you intervene and say, well, no,
Well,
because
exactly. It may not want to be with you at the end anyway.
exactly, and it's not going to be the same person. It will just look like them because half of the reason we fall in love with people, unless we're particularly shallow, the initial attraction is there, but actually it's their personality, it's the beauty inside them
Yeah.
that we fall in love with. And Frina and I often have this argument, well, not argument as such, conversation. Oh, you wouldn't love me if I didn't have any legs. I didn't marry her for her legs. You know what I mean? If something happened to her, it's her. It's not the physical
Right.
body. It's more her mind. That I enjoy the company of. And so the person is going to grow up to be someone completely different. If you're a product of your environment, then its upbringing is going to be completely different to the upbringing of the person you lost. So
Yes.
it's madness. But you can,
It's
like you quite rightly said, you can imagine there are certain wealthy people out there that wouldn't bat an eyelid at doing something like this.
Yes, certainly a lot of freaky people in that. So, so it's the rise of the clones in your book, but you don't stay fully with clones, but you go back to a lot to do with the Cabbage Patch Kids and the influx because of the reset of 1776 and the need to repopulate the world. Is that right?
Yeah. So what got me interested in the cloning aspect and the Cabbage Patch Kids generally was I was researching Tartaria, and that was really my favorite or obsessive rabbit hole to go down from the start of the pandemic. I've always been into conspiracy theories, but it was Tartaria for me that became an obsession, and it still is today. But there are lots of different sort of offshoots to it. It has lots of elements to it. One is Nikola Tesla, one is the buildings themselves and the World's Fairs, but one is the repopulation program. Now that was called the Cabbage Patch Babies. And the reason for writing the second book is actually because I put a poll onto onto Facebook, on my Facebook group, and said, there's sort of 30 odd thousand members on there. And I said to them, of all of the chapters of my book, if you've read it, which was your favorite? And 70%, which is just over, said that it was the Cabbage Patch Babies because they're fascinated with the postcards, the movies that came out, produced, directed, and starring Alice Guy, then the incubator babies and the orphan trains. There was a mass movement and sudden influx of children and babies across the world. And I dug into the figures on that as well. And that is the reason for that book. It was actually the one that the people that are into Tartaria found the most interesting of all. So yes, a mass, in my opinion, and that of other people that have researched this too, a mass cloning experiment took place in plain sight, known as the Cabbage Patch Babies.
So were the babies were the clones?
Yeah, yeah.
They weren't just orphans from tragedies of like war.
No, combined. Yeah.
Combined.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I'll just give you some stats. So 1776, the population of the world. Now I know that this is up for debate because I question the population right now. I don't think we're overpopulated. I think it's actually the reverse.
There's only two of us. It's just you and me. At this moment in time, I can't see anybody else. It's just you and me.
There's nobody near where I am. I haven't seen anybody for 9 days apart from a woman in a post office. So 770 million people wandering around in 1776, 770 million. 100 years later, that had doubled to just under 1.4 billion in 100 years. You think, okay.
Is this across the globe?
Yeah.
So that includes
across or around, depending on your point of view.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah.
But I mean, that includes China.
That includes everywhere. That I actually, I
And
asked.
how do we know that that figure? I mean, like we said, how do we know any of the figures are right? No one's gone out there. But would they have had any technology back then to count 770 million?
No, it's all guesswork, isn't it? And I think it is today as well, because I often think that that's the same issue we would have with calculating how many people live in the Amazon rainforest.
Mm.
Indigenous tribes and so on. We don't know. I mean, we know there are islands that we're not allowed to go onto because we'll be attacked. So for me, I guess it is a guesstimate
Right.
based on the statistics that they had at the time, and a bit of guesswork. But we kind of got to start somewhere. So I'm
Sure.
going with the narrative of what is alleged to be or what's stated as being the world population. So it doubles in 100 years. You think, well, okay. I mean that's one hell of an achievement to suddenly within 100 years an additional 770 million people appear. You think, oh well, okay, but well maybe that is achievable. But when you look at the number of deaths within the same period of time, it's 3.3 billion people died in the same period of time. So you've doubled the population and over.
So you've got 14 million, but 3 billion have died. Where
So you've
is that?
got 1.3. So if you like, the population doubles between 1776. It goes from 770 million to just under 1.4 billion. So it doubles,
Right.
in 100 years. But during that same period of time, that same 100 years, we lost 3 billion through natural disease.
But wait a minute, that sounds like there's more people died than there was to begin with.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, my
So
maths isn't
no,
brilliant,
your
but
maths is spot on, Richard.
if you've got
Mm,
1.5 billion and yet 3 point something, three is bigger than one and a half,
mm-hmm.
and therefore, where were the people who died? Where did they come from, or were those
Yeah.
deaths somewhere? The calculation is obviously not right.
No, none of it makes any sense at all. And what I think they're doing is that when they give us the population figures, they're not taking into account that somebody might do this research and or just dismiss it and just think, oh well, it's just a glitch or something. So how could you have, you know, over double the amount of, well, nearly three times the amount of people died than
Hmm.
there was the population? And this is, yeah, so 20 million through genocide, pandemics 150 million, 60 million through famines, 50 million through the various civil wars that took place, and 3 billion from natural death. That's within 100 years. And I double checked that. I even, and I sort of have a love hate relationship with AI, like I guess you do too. I even checked on ChatGPT, and it gave me exactly the same numbers. Deaths within that period, 3.3 billion. Population at the end of that period, 1.35 billion.
So this is between 1776 and
Yeah,
1876.
yeah. So I just took 100 years because that for
Yeah.
me is sort of the key period of time, really. So the only way you could repopulate at that extent and at that rate, and bearing in mind that a lot of men were killed in war,
Hmm.
and I understand that some of them might wanted to have, before they went off to war, um,
Had a
had a
baby.
baby. But a lot of these wars didn't go on for 9 months. These men were away for years, and only
Hmm.
a very small proportion came back. So the world population doubles at a time when almost three times the amount of the population had died. So there's a significant problem there. Something doesn't stack up. So the only way I could calculate this, or make any logical sense of it, was by following this route, that this cloning exercise that a lot of people talk about, the Cabbage Patch Babies, actually took place. And that is when I started digging, and that's when I started looking more closely into human cloning.
Right. Okay. So, and these babies were, how were they in the same? I mean, obviously the technology must have been very different to the company you mentioned before that somehow grew them in the space of super time.
Yeah. I think it was probably very, very different, but also very same when it comes to the principles of it, because I appreciate that the Bible is full of metaphors, but if you read Genesis, then they take a rib from Adam, and create another life form. Now, if that is a metaphor, if we just accept it as a metaphor, well, the Bible is a very old document. Whoever wrote that was talking about the process that you would have used without today's technology to replicate another person, to make a clone. So there it is in black and white in the Bible. If it's a metaphor, they're still talking about the same process. Whether or not it happened is kind of irrelevant. They've written it in black and white that a rib was taken from one human to make another. It's there
Right.
for everybody to see.
Right. I mean, I suppose people might argue that they say, well, that was God doing it, not a firm down the road.
Yes, no, I understand that, but for me, God isn't perhaps the person they're talking about in the Bible is not really who I believe to be the source or the creator of all. I think they're talking about someone completely different because, it flips, doesn't it? It's God's plural, then it's God, then it's Lord, and for me, I believe that they're talking about the Anunnaki, who if the people follow the work of Zachariah Sitchin or look into Billy Carson's work with the Emerald Tablets, the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the story of the Elohim, it doesn't have to be the Anunnaki. The same story appears in texts and scriptures across the world, that beings came and intervened and created a slave race, and that is who we are today. So whether or not you believe in the Anunnaki or the Elohim creating a slave race, and that is, the Homo sapien, or whether you believe the Bible that somebody called God took a rib from another being. I mean, it does beg the question: if they can make one, why didn't they just make another? But they took a rib from Adam to create a partner for him. So this cloning, that's what they're talking about ultimately, appears to go back to the very dawn of mankind.
Right. Okay. I mean, I think there's so many things in that that one could spend a couple of hours just unpacking there, because
Yes,
you've got
yes,
all the Anunnaki and all that, and
yeah,
you brought the Bible in, which will obviously slightly raise some people's hackles. And of course, you've got to go into the whole authenticity of whether the Bible was written by, not,
yeah,
it's
of
obviously not
course.
written by one person in an afternoon. So anyway, going back to these Cabbage Patch Kids, why cabbage? Where does the cabbage bit come in?
It's old Slavic folklore that they used to tell their children because they didn't want to discuss the reproductive process with children. That they would say that babies were grown in cabbage patches, and it's just Slavic folklore. But the cabbage actually has lots of different meanings. They used to, several hundred years ago, they would actually take the urine of someone that's pregnant and put cabbage leaves in it. And if the cabbage leaves went blue, then now this is strange. If the cabbage leaves, if the water went blue, it was a girl, and if it was a sort of purpley color, it was a boy, and that's obviously been switched around. Um, so in Slavic folklore, the myth of babies being born from cabbages, it goes back, a very long time. And there's actually a monument outside a maternity hospital in Tomsk in Russia it's called Imana, and it's got a baby emerging from a cabbage. So it's Slavic folklore, and they're suggesting that babies were grown,
Right,
like you would grow
right.
anything else. Yeah.
You have a chapter in your book about Ancestry.com, which is
Mm.
an online service for people who want to trace their history. And I presume that there are other online services that do similar things. But you've singled out Ancestry.com as opposed to any other service, and you're, let's say, not very complimentary about it. So maybe you could tell us, without us getting sued by a company
Yeah.
who might not wish to have any slander or anything, what's wrong with a place like Ancestry.com?
The reason that I spoke about Ancestry.com is because they're perhaps the most popular, but there are lots of other genealogy websites out there, and I have included them in the chapter. And one of the largest databases of genealogy is actually the Mormon Church, and they have vaults that are actually carved into or dug into a mountain, that keeps all of their information secure. And it's linked to PKU test, the heel prick test. And
The what
the
test?
heel prick test, when a baby's born, they'll prick its heel to take a drop of blood, and that is stored. Some people believe that that's stored in the Vatican, and that actually that is what's used to register us as this sort of dead entity, this legal fiction. But Ancestry.com, I wrote about specifically because of my own experience with them. Because I opened a can of worms that I shouldn't have done, because I did send off my DNA because I hit a wall. I couldn't get past really 1800 when I was doing my family tree. And the parish church where on my father's side down in Devon, where the records were kept, were destroyed in a fire. And I've reached out to other people through different groups, and they've all found the same problem, that either they've got all the information you could ever want, and Bibles and books have been passed down through generations, or they found that actually the information was lost, damaged in a fire, or destroyed in a flood. And that's a constant wall that people hit. So I sent my DNA off to Ancestry.com, and it came back saying that my grandfather on my mother's side wasn't my grandfather, it was somebody else, a man called Harry Hyman from Ukraine. And he'd come over to America as an orphan, been stationed in England during the Second World War, met my grandfather while he was away at war, and my mum popped out. And the strange thing is that my mum had said, uh, for as long as I could remember, whenever asked about why does she look different to her brother and her sister, why is there such a big age gap, why was she this Cinderella figure that her parents adored her older brother and sister, but really she didn't get much attention at all. And we could see that, into my adulthood while my grandparents are still around. And she used to say, well, that's because they always told me I was found at the bottom of the garden in a cabbage patch. And her brother used to tease her and say that you're not really my sister, and we found you, the gypsies dropped you off, and come up with all of these horrible sort of comments to her growing up that she wasn't theirs. And she dismissed it as sort of jealousy because she came along and was the baby, 10 years after her brother and sister. But doing the digging on Ancestry.com, it suggested that her father wasn't really her father. So I had to sit down with her and tell her. Now I'm pretty convinced that that information I found on Ancestry.com is correct, but there is, of course, the chance that it isn't, and I have upset people as a direct result to the fact where my auntie and uncle don't speak to me anymore. So it caused a problem just by my sending the DNA in. But my other
And
beef
when you say you sent DNA, what do you
swab,
mean by
just
DNA? A
yeah,
swab of saliva?
yeah, just a swab, yeah,
And I guess if that gets contaminated or confused with somebody at the lab, in however it is,
yeah.
they could come out with all sorts of information, or just ancestry.com may have got it wrong,
Or they could make it up.
or they could
Mm.
absolutely, or they could make it up, as a semi-famous presenter once said when asked a question, what do you do if you don't know the answer? Just make it
Make
up.
it up. Yeah.
So is it, I mean, and we're not saying, by the way, that Ancestry.com does any of this. I'm covering my back here. We're not suggesting that at all. But what you are saying is that people could not get further back. Are you saying that on these genealogy sites, of which Ancestry.com is purely one of them, that they can't go back to, I don't know, the 1300s, the time
No,
of the Normans, to that?
no. Quite most people can't go back that far. There doesn't appear to be anything there. It's sort of the trail runs dry. But there, of course, there are people that can.
Hmm.
Um, and my other concern with and that is what connected me to the possibility that a cloning exercise took place. And the more I dug into it, the more that possibility became to be, for me at least, likely. So I shared my views with other people, and they'd come up with the same kind of wall, I suppose, or hurdle. But my other issue with Ancestry.com in particular, or my other concern, sorry, is the company that owns them, which is Blackstone, who were previously part of BlackRock, because they've now got the largest database of DNA that exists, and they're also heavily investing in products that could be used in warfare, that could cause another situation like we had in 2020, where with the information that they have, they could target specific groups of people. And
Right.
but I won't go into too much detail because of the platform we're on, but I have written about that. So my concern is that you've got a company like Blackstone, um, who most people confuse with BlackRock, but essentially it was the same company originally, that are heavily invested in bioweaponry and now have the largest database of human DNA in the world.
So
That is
people
my
can, yeah,
concern.
people can make a connection there if they so
Yeah,
wish.
yeah,
But at one point, Ancestry.com was not bought. Like so many of these companies, they start off small, they get popular, and then a big conglomerate comes along and makes them an offer they can't refuse,
yeah.
and so they sell. So presumably, Ancestry.com or any of these, they still had the same problem that they couldn't take people back further than that. You would think that people would have talked about that quite a lot, saying, "Well, you're not going back very far. What are you claiming?"
Yeah, well, I don't.
In the early days
Yeah,
before another company comes and takes it over.
but Ancestry.com actually started off as a magazine.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, you're quite right. But you see, that's where I got to. I got to this wall, and because there's nobody you can talk to, Ancestry, you can't pick up the phone and say, "I've hit a wall," blah blah blah. It comes up with the suggestion that you send off your DNA.
Right.
If you want to
Okay.
get any further, we suggest you send your DNA in, and then that way we can trace, missing relatives, perhaps half siblings that you didn't know about, and we can reconnect you. And as soon as I sent mine in and looked at the results, it connected me to several other family trees, all through the person that they stated was my mother's real father, this Harry Hyman figure from
Mm.
Ukraine. So I sent mine off, and I've included people's stories in my book, a chapter of people's experiences. But I was bombarded. I put a post up on a couple of groups that said and these were to do with orphan trains and orphans. Have you found a problem on Ancestry.com? If so, get in touch. Um, and I put a little podcast out there appealing for people to help. And they all said the same thing. They hit a wall, sent their DNA off, and then it connected them to other family trees. Half of them didn't believe that the information they were being given was accurate, and half of them discovered that they had siblings they weren't aware of. And one person in particular is the actor from the film E.T., Drew Barrymore, the young, she played the young girl, Elliot's sister, and I can't remember the character's name. She did exactly the same thing and publicly spoke out about it, saying that she found out she had a half sibling she was completely unaware of. And it was Ancestry.com that provided her with that information. So, yeah, I think people just resort to send their DNA in because they do hit a
Yes.
wall. And of course, it's more expensive, another 70, £80
Right.
for
Yes.
the
No.
privilege.
Just to be clear, though, in terms of because Ancestry.com are not here to answer any allegations. Just to be clear, that this may be a service which is entirely valuable to people,
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
and that they may be finding things that people will find very useful. So I just want to make that clear because I have no skin in the game, as it were.
Well, I found it useful. I sent my DNA off because I wanted to find out how much
Yes.
further back I could go. And then
So,
when,
do you believe the information that you got back was about accurate then?
yeah, I do. I do.
Well, that's very
And
good.
that's,
That's a plus for
oh, yeah.
Ancestry.com.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's just that there is a big part of me that wishes I'd never done it because I had to tell my mother. I had to tell her what I'd
Right.
found. And that
Okay.
conversation seemed to go okay until the following day when my brother rang me and my mother had called him in tears that evening saying what I'd told her. Then I fell
Yeah.
out with my brother. We didn't speak for a bit. And so I can't, there's a big part of me that wishes I'd never
So
bothered.
obviously, people have got to make their own due diligence when they
Yeah,
use a
decide.
service like that. Absolutely,
Yeah,
and
so
decide what, because the information may shock them, surprise them, etc. Let's not dwell on that too much, but just accept that with the DNA information, does that take you further back than the wall that you're hitting? And does that take you back to potentially the Norman period or even the
That
Saxons?
was the problem. It didn't take me any further back. It took me sideways.
Ah,
Yeah, I
okay.
still couldn't get any further back. It's,
Right,
on my father's side, I sort of got to the very early 1800s, and then beyond that, it couldn't find anything. And sometimes it will find a newspaper article or an old photograph or an image that somebody else has uploaded. I found nothing on
right.
either side. And that does appear to be quite a common theme. But then there are people out there that have spoken to me and said, well, I've got a family Bible and we've had it for hundreds of years. Um, a lot of it's weathered; you can't see the detail very clearly. But this has been handed down through generations, and I always say the same thing to them that you're so lucky. You don't realize how lucky you are. A lot of people spend their lives trying to create the family tree and just can't go back anywhere
Mm.
past the 1800s. And there are always going to be people that can, but I don't think there are as many that can that hit the wall of not being able to.
Right, but hitting the wall that you can't go back, is that, are you inferencing that the reason you hit this wall, you get to a point, is because of this 1776 sort of reset that happened? That you, in theory, if that's happened completely, you should not be able to go back to 1770, for example, with a generational member of the family. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, kind of. Yeah, yeah. There are people when the reset took place. We know that New World Order began in 1776. It's on the American dollar bill. It was start of New World Order. It's there for everybody to see who wants to have a look at the reverse. It's written on the American dollar bill. So the people that wouldn't comply. I mean, obviously we'd lost a lot of people through civil wars leading up to that period. So the people that were left were given an option, and that was to toe the line or to be incarcerated, because suddenly we had the Lunacy Act open at a start and asylums open, and we had a lot of prisons open across the world at the same time. There's one in Tasmania that opened around the same time as the reset, and within a few years had 70,000 people convicted and imprisoned in it from a standing start. So this happened very relatively quickly, and I think it was the people that wouldn't comply. A little bit like, I suppose, my fear now that because I speak out about certain things, and obviously you have as well, and every now and again someone will tell me that they're building these places that people that fight back against the system are going to end up being taken off and whatever. And I think that that is what happened. But the people that would toe the line will, of course, be able to continue their ancestry right up to today. Um,
And when you say toe the line, I mean, what were they were asked to do that some people wouldn't have wanted to do?
Comply to how things were now going to be. So the Tartarian period, and the reason for Nikola Tesla's involvement is because they were harnessing energy from the ether, and this is what they term as Atlantean technology. So they're harnessing energy through the ether. Now that overnight stops, and then we see the fossil fuel, the beginning of fossil fuels and coal, and the industrial revolution. A lot of steam and a lot, and then obviously petroleum and oil. If you had had free energy your entire life, and then all of a sudden everything's dismantled and taken away, and now you've got to pay for it, or you go back to almost a kind of primitive way of living, um, you're going to object to it. Well, the people that objected to it were dealt with, and the people that took it on the chin were enabled enabled to carry on. So that, and of course, there are going to be people through certain organizations that were implicit in this. So in America, the Odd Fellows were the people that organized the orphan train movement. And there are quite a few books out there about that. And some children went through, the majority of children went through a horrific experience at the hands of a particular group of people. So there are other groups as well that were implicit in this. And when you look at the number of people involved in these organizations, they're going to consist of large groups last sorry people that have families. So you're looking at large groups of people, large numbers of people. So to have that infrastructure in place to be able to start again and conduct a reset and have everything up and running, you're going to need people to do that are on side. They're going to have families, and they're now going to have descendants. So there are a lot of people that walked through the last reset on top. But the majority of the people, I guess it's a little bit like today, the 99%, were the ones that paid the ultimate price.
Bit of a worry, and yet they still needed all these clones. But listen, we'll draw it to a close. Your book is fascinating. It is The Rise of the Clones, the Cabbage Patch Babies, the second in the series. Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids is the first one. Available now from Amazon, and can they get them from you directly, signed and all?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I send out signed copies. I send them out every week, all over the world. So it doesn't matter where someone lives. And obviously they're on Amazon as well. I couldn't get someone to publish the book for me, so I had to do print on demand. It was the only option I had.
Well, loads of people do that, so no need to apologise there. I was talking to Mark Devlin, as you mentioned earlier, and also John Hamer, who told me that when they do a book and they're sending it from the UK, they go missing. Do you ever have that problem?
I've had that happen twice. Now, once was a lady in Australia. It took 6 months to arrive, my first book. In the meantime, I'd sent her another one out, just took it on the chin and thought, well, she's paid me in good faith. It hasn't arrived. It's been over a month. I know it can take 42 days sometimes to arrive. That's the maximum length of time. So
Does it go in a rubber dinghy or something?
Oh, I know. I mean, it actually is going by ship, apparently.
Right.
But sometimes they get put in airmail by mistake. So some people receive them relatively quickly. So I sent her another one. And then, 3 months later, the first book arrived, and she donated it to a local library. So I've had that happen a couple of times, but I make sure that they do get another copy sent out. And what I do is I send them a free copy of the audio book, so they've got something to listen to while they're waiting for the next one to turn up.
So that's the other thing to say, that you have audio books for the first one, and the second one, is that now on its way, isn't it?
Yeah, halfway through that one. And I totally agree with yourself and Mark. I wish I could have done the audiobooks myself, but when I read my books out, I go into editing mode, and I can't read them without thinking, I could have used a different word there. It doesn't work. I can't do it. I just can't.
Fair
I've
enough.
tried and failed.
No problem at all. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. If you've bought the first one, have a follow-up with the second one. Guy, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us about your books. Are you writing another one?
Slowly. The second most popular chapter of that first book was about the world's fairs and expositions. So I'm going to slowly do that, but my wife wants me to just take a little bit more of a relaxed approach rather than, dedicating.
Well, that's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair enough. I think you've got two great books out there. Great reads, ladies and gentlemen. And if you're new to the subject, Guy eases you in to all the possibilities. And so if you're a bit confused by what was going on there, and I get confused myself because there's so much information, then these books are for you. Guy, thank you so much for talking to me. It's been an absolute pleasure as ever. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure that when you look in the mirror, it's not a clone looking back at you. Or indeed, if you happen to switch on the YouTube and you see yourself coming back at you, that might be an AI clone, as it happens to me from time to time. But there we are. If you know who you are and what you are, you'll survive. Until next time, from Guy and I, thank you for watching. Take care.
Thank you.
And goodbye.